So the next loop that we will be going over is the do until loop. And this loop is used for when you want to repeat a set of statements as long as a condition is false. I will explain more about that condition once we start writing the code for the do until loop. So for this example, we will be doing something very similar that we did in the for next loop, but this time around, we will loop through the cells within the width curve column and highlight the cells that have a value that's less than or equal to 70 red. So within our loops module, we need to add a new sub. And I will call it do until. Once again, we will be using a variable inside of this loop. So let's go ahead and declare our variable x as integer. And unlike the for next loop, where we put for x is equal to something to whatever number of how many times we want to repeat the loop, for the do until loop, we need to set x equal to something before we start writing the loop. So we can type in x equals 1, and now we can start writing the loop. So we need to type in do until, and we want to loop through the cells within the width curve column. So we can type in cells, open parentheses, x comma 5, close parentheses, equals, and here's where we need to state our condition. And basically, we are trying to tell this loop when to stop. Well, we want to stop this loop when it gets to the last row of data. Well, instead of using last row, we could put blank, which is open quotes and close quotes. So as x increases and goes down these cells within the width curve column, once it gets to a cell that's blank, which is this row right here, the loop will stop. And to close this loop, we can put loop. And for any statements that we put between these two lines of code, we'll keep on getting executed until it gets to that blank cell. And here we are going to use another if statement so we can find the cells that are less than or equal to 70. So we can type in if cells x comma 5, since we want to highlight the cells that are in the fifth column of this worksheet, close parentheses, is less than or equal to 70, then cells x comma 5 dot interior dot color equals VB red, and then end the if. Now this next line of code is very important, and unlike the for next loop, it automatically increased x by 1 every time it completed one cycle of the loop. Well, inside the do until loop, we need to specify of how much we want to increase x by per loop. So we need to type in x equals x plus 1 because we want to go down one cell each time. And that's it. So for our condition of the loop, it says do until cells x comma 5 is blank. So it's going to keep running this loop as long as there's a value within the cell that's in the width curve column. And if one of the cells is less than or equal to 70, then we are going to highlight that cell red. And then we are going to increase x by 1 and then loop back up to the top and repeat the process. And one of the main reasons why this line is so important is because if you don't increase x by anything, that means x will always be 1 for each loop. And that will cause this loop to run forever. Because if our x value remains 1, that cell will never be empty because that has our column heading. So it would just keep on looping and looping, causing Excel to crash. And one more thing before we run this sub, let's change our x value to 2. So it starts on row 2 instead of row 1. So if we click play, it highlighted the cells that have a value of 67 and 63, which is less than or equal to 70. So that's how you can use the do until loop. You can also change this loop up a little bit to make it a do loop until, meaning that we can take this condition right here and move it down here to make it say loop until cells x comma 5 is blank. So you can state your condition at the beginning of the loop or at the end of the loop. And before we move on to the next video, I want to make sure you understand that this line of code right here prevents us getting stuck in a never-ending loop, and it increases the x value by 1 every time we go through this loop. So this loop started out as cells 2, 5, and then once we got down here, it increased x by 1, so now this is 3, 5, and then it goes to 4, 5, and so on.